Sound. Do you hear it? That's not the hiss of this old tape. That's the wind. The wind in Viridian Bluffs. A small town huddled on the Oregon coast, forgotten by the highways and by time. On a map, it's just a tiny dot, a meaningless name. But if you've ever set foot there, you'd understand that Viridian Bluffs isn't a place. It's a state of being. A chronic illness of the memory. The wind here doesn't blow. It moans. It snakes through the ancient pine forests, carrying the sharp salt spray of the Pacific and a bone-deep chill, the cold of untended graves. It tells stories that no one dares repeat aloud. I know, because I grew up there. And I went back, a mistake for which I will pay with my sanity. I am Arthur Penhaligon, once a journalist, a truth seeker with a promising future in a distant, big city. But that was another life, another man. That man died the night I published a story that destroyed an innocent man. I was too hasty, too hungry for glory, and I bent the truth to fit my narrative. The real truth eventually came out, and I fell from grace. Fired, shunned by society, spat upon by my own reflection every time I looked in the mirror. So I did what every failure does. I ran. I returned to the only place left in the world that would have me. My parents' house in Viridian Bluffs. An old, two-story wooden house, standing alone on a slope overlooking the sea. My parents had passed away years ago, leaving me the house and a heavy silence. The house was the same, coated in a layer of dust as thick as a shroud. The smell of rotting wood, of damp old books, and of buried memories greeted me like an old friend. I didn't come back here to find peace. I came back here to be punished. To drown in my solitude and my guilt, to let the sea and the fog gnaw at me until there was nothing left. Viridian Bluffs is a still life painting of decay. Victorian houses with peeling paint stood silent, their empty window panes like blind eyes staring out at the deserted Main Street. The Miller's General Store was still there, its wooden sign faded. The Salty Dog Tavern was still the place where men with skin weathered by sea wind came to drink away the fish they didn't catch and the dreams they'd lost. And on the highest hill, looming like a giant skeleton, was St. Giles Church. Abandoned. Its stained glass windows were shattered, letting the wind howl through, singing ghostly hymns. They say the last priest hanged himself from the belfry, and since then, not a single bell has rung. Instead, on nights with a full moon, some swear they can hear the creak of a rope in the wind. This town lives by its own rhythm, a rhythm of silence. The people here don't talk much. They communicate with nods, with fleeting glances. They hold their secrets like they hold the last coins in their pockets. They are a closed community, wary of outsiders and even warier of those who left and came back, like me. To them, I was an old, healed scar that had started to ache again. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. Little Arthur has come home. The failure. The first few weeks passed in a hazy fog of whiskey and self-hatred. I spent my days staring at the sea, watching the ceaseless gray waves crash against the rocky shore. At night, I sat in the dark, listening to the old house creak and groan. Sometimes, I felt I wasn't alone. I'd hear soft footsteps in the attic, the faint clink of something metal in a locked drawer. I told myself it was just the alcohol, the exhaustion, the loneliness eating away at my mind. But deep down, a part of my old journalistic instinct, a morbid curiosity, began to stir. This town was hiding something. An inherent fear, as old as the coastal rocks. It lay just beneath the surface of the silence, like a slumbering beast. And then, that beast began to stir. It all began on an October afternoon, when the fog was so thick you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. A little girl named Lily Patterson didn't come home from school. 12 years old, with hair as golden as the sun and eyes as blue as a summer sky, an image too bright and vibrant for a gloomy place like Viridian Bluffs. Her mother, a thin woman with perpetual worry etched in her eyes, ran through the streets, calling her daughter's name in vain. Her voice grew hoarse, swallowed by the fog. At first, people thought the girl had just wandered off, maybe into the woods to play or down to the beach to look for shells. Sheriff Brody, a large man with a ruddy face and a drooping mustache, organized a search party. They walked the coastline, calling her name. They went into the edge of the woods, their flashlights weak pinpricks struggling against the darkness. But they found nothing, not a footprint, not a scrap of cloth. It was as if the earth had swallowed her whole. That night, the whole town was sleepless. Porch lights were left on at every house, a silent, desperate solidarity. I couldn't sleep either. I stood by the window, looking out at the blank white wall of fog, and a chill that had nothing to do with the weather began to creep up my spine. It was a feeling of déjà vu. A disturbingly familiar feeling. I had lived through a night like this before. A foggy night, a search, a missing child. But the memory was faint, like an old dream of which you can only remember the feeling. I tried to grasp it, but it kept slipping away, leaving a vague dread in its wake. The next morning, the fog lifted, but so did the hope. Lily was still gone. Sheriff Brody looked 10 years older. He paced back and forth in front of his office, constantly stroking his mustache, a nervous habit that betrayed his utter confusion. I, with the instincts of a news hound ingrained in my blood, decided to take a walk. I had no intention of interfering. I just wanted to observe. I wanted to see what the cracks in this town's silent facade looked like. I went to the Patterson house. A neat little cottage with a white picket fence, now looking like a tomb. Mrs. Patterson sat on the porch swing, her eyes staring blankly into space. Mr. Patterson stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, but his touch offered no warmth. I approached, hesitating. "I'm sorry," I said, the words sounding hollow and useless. Mrs. Patterson didn't look at me. She started muttering, her voice a monotone drone like the lapping of waves. She liked to sing. The girl was always singing. An old lullaby. Her grandmother taught it to her. The one about the children who go into the woods and never come back. She let out a dry, horrifying laugh. It's funny, isn't it? The songs we sing to our children. A chill ran down my spine. A lullaby. Which one? I wanted to ask, but Mr. Patterson gestured for me to leave. His eyes were full of hostility. "Leave us alone," he said, his voice tight. I left, but Mrs. Patterson's words haunted me. A lullaby, a forest, children who never return. The déjà vu hit me again, stronger this time. I walked down the main street, trying to shake the feeling. I passed the abandoned St. Giles Church. The heavy wooden door was strangely ajar. Curious, I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air within was cold and stagnant. Dust lay thick on the pews. Faint light filtered through the broken stained glass windows, creating hazy shafts in the darkness. The smell of damp and bird droppings filled my nostrils. But there was another smell. A sweet, cloying scent. The smell of burnt candle wax. I walked down the main aisle, the sound of my footsteps echoing eerily. On the pulpit, where the priest had once preached, there was something. A black candle, burned nearly to its base, a thin wisp of smoke still curling from it. And next to the candle, drawn in white chalk on the wooden floor, was a symbol. An intricate spiral, with strange sigils I had never seen before. In the center of the spiral, there was a small, dark brown stain. It looked like dried blood. My heart began to pound. This wasn't a prank by some kids. This was something else. Something deliberate. Ancient. I realized I was holding my breath. I backed away, turning to leave. But then my eyes caught something lying under a pew. A small, leather-bound book. I picked it up. It was a diary. The cover was blank. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was shaky, a man's hand. October 14, 1983. The fog has come again. Thicker than ever. It carries the singing. A lullaby. God, that song. I've tried to bar the doors, but it still gets in. It's not coming from outside. It's coming from inside. From the very walls. From my own mind. 1983. I was 8 years old that year. The year my family abruptly left Viridian Bluffs in the middle of the night, without a word of explanation. My father just said he had a new job. We never came back. Until now. I flipped hastily through the pages. The handwriting grew more and more frantic, a near illegible scrawl. October 16, 1983. Another child is gone. The Henderson boy. They're searching again, but they won't find him. Just like the others, this town demands a price. A blood debt. We promised. We have been silent for too long. October 17, 1983. I have seen it. The entity in the fog. It has no shape. It is the void. It is fear given form. And it is calling my name. Father Michael. Father Michael. But I am no longer a servant of God. I am the guardian of something else. Father Michael. The priest who had killed himself. This was his diary. I slammed the book shut, my hand trembling. A missing child in 1983. The Henderson boy. I knew that name. He was my friend, Billy Henderson. We used to play together at the abandoned railway tracks. I had a faint memory of him. A freckled face. A wide, gap-toothed grin. And then, a void. A hole in my memory. I couldn't remember what happened to him. No one ever mentioned him again. It was as if he had never existed. The disappearance of Lily Patterson wasn't the first time. It was a repetition, a cycle, and I, somehow, had been here for the previous one. I hurried out of the church, my heart hammering in my chest. Father Michael's diary felt like a hot coal in my hand. What was I supposed to do? Take it to Sheriff Brody? Would he believe me? Or would he think that I, the failed outsider, was just trying to stir up trouble? The townspeople, did they know about this? We promised. We have been silent for too long. Their silence wasn't apathy. It was complicity. I ran home, locking the door behind me. I sat in the darkened living room, the bottle of whiskey on the table. But tonight, the alcohol offered no comfort. I opened the diary again, turning to the last page. The writing was almost impossible to read. It is coming. The cycle is nearly complete. They do not understand. They think sacrificing a child will appease it. But they are wrong. Each sacrifice only makes it stronger. It does not want one child. It wants us all. The seal is weakening. The gate is about to open. I tried to warn them. They called me a madman. I cannot let it happen. There is only one way to break the cycle. To break the curse. I must defile the holy place. With my own blood. God, forgive me. The page below was blank. I sat motionless in the dark. The room seemed to grow colder. The wind outside shrieked, clawing at the wooden planks of the house. And then I heard it. Very softly, from the attic above my head. The faint clink of something metal. I had heard this sound many times before and always dismissed it. But this time was different. It had a terrifying clarity. I slowly stood up, tiptoeing to the stairs leading to the attic. I gripped an old flashlight in my hand. Each wooden step creaked under my feet, the sound echoing in the dead silence of the house. The attic door was unlocked. I pushed it open. A gust of cold, stale air rushed out. I switched on the flashlight, aiming it into the darkness. The beam swept across old, cobweb-covered furniture. Old trunks. A rusted tricycle. Stacks of old newspapers. And then, the light landed on a small table in the corner. On the table, there was an object. An object I hadn't seen in nearly 30 years, but recognized instantly. It was an astrolabe, an antique brass navigational tool, exquisitely carved. But it wasn't normal. In its center, where the metal rings intersected, there was a small crack. And from that crack, a single drop of thick, black liquid was slowly oozing out, like a tear. The weeping astrolabe. That's what my father had called it. He said it was a family heirloom, passed down through generations. I remembered being fascinated by it as a child. I had spent hours just looking at it. But there was something else on the table, beside the astrolabe. Something that didn't belong. A small, cloth doll. It wore a little blue dress. Its hair was made of yellow yarn. It was the doll I had seen in Lily Patterson's room this morning, lying on her bed. I froze. My entire body went rigid with fear. How was it here? I hadn't left the house since returning from the Pattersons. No one could have gotten in. I took a step back, then another. My foot bumped into a stack of old newspapers, sending them tumbling to the floor with a loud thud. And as my flashlight beam swept across the scattered papers, I saw the headline of an old local paper, the Viridian Bluffs Chronicle. The date, October 18, 1983. And on the front page, was a black and white photograph. A group of townspeople standing in the fog, their faces etched with worry. The large headline ran across the page, "Search for Missing Boy Enters Third Day." And below the headline, a smaller picture. The photo of a young boy. With a freckled face and a gap-toothed grin. Billy Henderson. But Billy wasn't alone in the photo. Standing next to him, his arm around his friend's shoulder, was another boy. A boy with large, dark eyes and a serious expression. It was me. A wave of dizziness washed over me. The attic seemed to spin. Shattered fragments of memory began to surface in my mind, sharp as broken glass. Me and Billy. We were playing at the railway tracks. We heard a song, a sweet, enchanting lullaby, drifting from the woods. Billy wanted to go see. I tried to stop him. I was scared, but he wouldn't listen. He ran into the woods, following the song. I stood there alone. I didn't follow him. I didn't call for help. I just ran home. I had abandoned my friend. I was the last person to see Billy Henderson alive. And I had forgotten, or rather, I had been made to forget. The fear, the guilt, it was too much for an 8-year-old mind. My mind had buried it, locked it away. And my family, they had taken me away from here, to protect me from the truth. From this town, the clinking sound came again from the table. Louder this time. I shakily aimed the flashlight at it. The black tear on the weeping astrolabe had fallen, dripping onto Lily's doll. And as it touched the doll, a thin, grey wisp of smoke rose from it. The doll twitched. Its button eyes seemed to turn towards me. And then, from within the doll, a whispery voice emerged. A child's voice, faint, but full of resentment. Arthur. Why did you leave me? I screamed. A silent scream, trapped in my throat. I turned and fled the attic, slamming the door shut. I ran down the stairs, stumbled, and fell in a heap on the floor. I lay there, gasping for breath, my body shaking uncontrollably. The guilt I had carried for years for ruining a man with my words was now a pale shadow compared to this horror. This was my original sin. The source of every failure, every broken piece of my life. It started here, on a foggy afternoon 30 years ago. With a single, cowardly decision. Lily's disappearance wasn't just a repetition. It was a message, a reminder, for me. I hadn't returned here by chance. I had been called back. This town wasn't finished with me. And the monster in the fog, it was still waiting. It had been waiting for me for 30 years. To finish what it started, I looked out the window. The fog was rolling in again from the sea, thick and white, swallowing everything in its path. And from within the fog, I swore I could hear it. Faintly, but growing clearer. A lullaby, the song about the children who go into the woods and never come back. I didn't know if I would survive the night. I only knew that my investigation had just begun. I was no longer searching for the truth about Lily Patterson. I was searching for the truth about myself. About the monster I had helped create, with my silence. I had to learn about this ancient ritual, about the blood debt this town was paying. I had to face the ghosts of the past, both the town's and my own. I was no longer a journalist looking for a story. I was a sinner looking for redemption. Or perhaps, just an end. That night stretched for a millennium. Sleep did not come. It merely hovered at the periphery of my mind, a tempting but unreachable promised land. Every creak of the house was the footstep of a ghost. Every gust of wind whistling through a crack in the frame was my name being whispered. I sat in the dark, Father Michael's diary on the table like a judgment, and the weeping astrolabe in the attic like the house's beating, diseased heart, leaking its black poison. The image of Billy Henderson's face and the voice from the doll replayed in my head, a symphony of guilt and horror. I was a coward. I had run. And now, 30 years later, the running was over. That forest, that fog, they had come to collect their debt. The next morning, I looked like a man who had clawed his way back from the grave. Eyes bruised with sleeplessness, a rough scruff of a beard, clothes rumpled. But something within me had changed. The weary self-loathing had been replaced by something else. A cold, almost frenzied determination. I would not run again. I would walk into the heart of the storm. I needed answers, and I knew where to begin. The abandoned railway tracks. The place where my memory ended, and Billy's nightmare began. The path to the tracks had been nearly swallowed by nature. Ferns grew in thick clumps, and low-hanging branches reached out like bony arms trying to scratch my face. The air here was damp and heavy, thick with the smell of rotted earth and decaying leaves. I could hear the drone of insects, and the distant tapping of a woodpecker, its steady rhythm sounding like a clock counting down to some terrible event. Finally, I saw them. 2 rusted strips of steel running parallel, disappearing into a wall of verdant green. This was once the lifeblood of Viridian Bluffs, connecting it to the outside world. Now, it was just a forgotten skeleton. I walked on the rotting wooden ties, my footsteps sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. This was the place. I could feel it. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. I looked into the forest. It was dark and dense, even in the daylight. The enormous pine trees stood shoulder to shoulder like sentinels guarding an ancient secret. The sunlight struggled to pierce the thick canopy, creating dappled patches of light on the pine needle-covered ground. They looked like fingers, pointing the way. I took a deep breath and stepped into the woods. Instantly, the outside world vanished. Sound was muffled. The light grew dim. I was alone with the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of leaves under my feet. I followed a barely visible trail, the path Lily might have taken. The path Billy had taken. I didn't know what I was looking for. A clue, a sign, anything. After about 15 minutes of walking, I found it. A small clearing among the trees. And in the center of the clearing was a large, flat rock, covered in moss. It looked almost like an altar. And on the surface of the rock, there were carvings. Not the idle graffiti of children. These were symbols. Sharp, intricate. Some of them resembled what I had seen on the church floor. The spiral, the waving lines, and a recurring symbol, a wide open eye, with no lid, a single tear falling from it. The symbol of the weeping astrolabe. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was a place of significance. A place of ritual. I knelt, brushing away the moss and dead leaves from the stone's surface. There were more carvings beneath. Stick figures with unnaturally long limbs, dancing around an amorphous shape in the center. And then, I saw the names. Carved crudely into the stone. L.P. Lily Patterson. Next to it, another set of initials, faded with time. B.H. Billy Henderson. And there were others, some almost illegible. S.M. J.D. This was a list. A sacrificial ledger. A wave of nausea rose in my throat. This town hadn't just sacrificed one child. They had been doing this for generations. But why? To appease what? The entity in the fog, Father Michael had written. As I was studying the names, the snap of a twig behind me made me jump. I scrambled to my feet, spinning around. Standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me, was a woman. She was old, gaunt, dressed in a tattered coat. Her gray hair was a tangled mess, and her eyes had a strange, wild light in the gloom. It was Alara, the woman the town called Mad Alara. She was always muttering to herself, feeding stray cats down at the docks. "You should not be here," she said, her voice as coarse as gravel grinding together. "This is the Weeper's place." "The Weeper?" I asked, trying to keep my own voice from trembling. "It comes from the sea," she whispered, stepping closer. Her eyes darted around, as if searching for something in the shadows between the trees. "It was here before the town. Before the trees. It sleeps beneath the waves, in its drowned city. But sometimes, it wakes. When it is hungry. Hungry for what?" Alara looked directly into my eyes. For a moment, the madness in him vanished, replaced by a terrifying lucidity. "It feeds on sorrow. It feeds on loss. It feeds on the memories of children. Every generation, we must feed it. It is the bargain, one young soul, for the peace of the rest. So the sea does not rise and swallow us. So the fish still bite. So the fog does not stay forever. A bargain? Who made this bargain?" I asked, a dreadful coldness seeping into me. "The founders," she said, her voice barely audible. "They found this stone. They heard the Weeper's whispers from below the earth. They performed the first ritual. And we have been bound ever since. The blood debt must be paid." Her words, as mad as they sounded, had a terrible logic to them. It explained the silence, the complicity, the fear that hung over the town like a shroud. They weren't monsters. They were prisoners, trapped in a horrific tradition they didn't dare break. "Lily Patterson," I began. "She was chosen," Alara cut in. "Like the others before her. She heard the song, the Weeper's lullaby, the song that calls them home. To the cold water." She looked at the stone. "We carve their names here, so the Weeper does not forget our promise. And so we do not forget the price of our lives." "What about Billy Henderson?" I asked, my voice a mere whisper. "My friend, what happened to him?" The madness returned to Alara's eyes. She let out a sharp, cackling laugh. "That boy was different. He was not chosen. He merely followed the call. But the Weeper cannot take a soul that is not offered. So he was rejected, trapped, caught between worlds. An echo, a shadow. Sometimes, I still see him in the woods, looking for the friend who abandoned him." She stared at me, her eyes piercing. "He is still waiting for you, Arthur Penhaligon." My world collapsed. Billy wasn't dead. He was something worse than dead. A lost soul, imprisoned here for 30 years. And it was my fault. "How do I stop this?" I asked, desperate. "How do I break the bargain?" Alara shook her head. "You can't. To break the bargain is to face its wrath. The wrath of the sea. Of the fog. This town will be erased." She backed away, melting into the shadows of the forest. "Leave this place, boy. Forget what you have seen. Run, just like you did before. It is your only chance." And then, she was gone. I stood there alone, beside the stone carved with the names of lost children. The truth was more monstrous than anything I could have imagined. This wasn't a murder case. It was a centuries-long sacrificial rite. And I, somehow, was a part of it. I returned to town, my mind reeling. I needed more proof. I needed to understand the ritual. Father Michael's diary was only one piece of the puzzle. I had to find the others. I thought of the town library, an old brick building next to the town hall. Perhaps there were old records, local histories that might reveal something. The library was empty except for Mrs. Gable, the librarian, an elderly woman with thick glasses and a tight silver bun. She peered at me over her spectacles as I entered. "Arthur," she said, her tone devoid of emotion. "It's been a long time." "Mrs. Gable," I said. "I'd like to see the archives. Local history. Old newspapers." Mrs. Gable's brow furrowed. "What for?" "Looking for a new story." Her voice held an unmistakable trace of sarcasm. "Just a little curiosity about the place I grew up," I lied. She stared at me for a long moment, then sighed, nodding toward a door at the back of the room. "In the basement. Be careful, it's full of spiders." The library basement was even colder and mustier than the church. Stacks of books and old newspapers rose to the ceiling, the smell of old paper and dust thick in the air. A single bare bulb cast a weak, yellow light. I began to search. I went through town annals, books written by local amateur historians. Most of it was tedious accounts of the town's founding, of the fishing and logging industries. There was no mention of a weeper or a bargain. The history had been carefully sanitized. But then, I found something. An old, unmarked cardboard box, shoved behind a filing cabinet. Inside was a collection of old reel-to-reel tapes. There was a handwritten label on one of them, Father Michael Interview. 1982, Oral History Project. My heart skipped a beat. I looked around and found an ancient, dust-covered reel-to-reel player in a corner. I plugged it in, threaded the tape, and pressed play. After a few hisses and crackles, a voice emerged. A younger voice, but one I recognized. It was Mrs. Gable. "And Father, how long have you served at St. Giles Church?" "Nearly 20 years now, Mrs. Gable," came Father Michael's voice, warm and measured. Completely different from the panicked scrawl in his diary. "I came here as a young seminarian and fell in love with the place. Can you tell us a bit about the local legends? Any ghost stories or folklore you've heard?" Mrs. Gable's voice asked. Father Michael chuckled. "Oh, every small coastal town has its stories. Of ghost ships, of mermaids. But here in Viridian Bluffs, there is one that is particularly persistent. They call it the Lullaby of the Fog." "The Lullaby of the Fog." "Yes," Father Michael continued. "The legend says that deep beneath the sea out there, there is an ancient entity. Some call it an old god, others a monster. They say it possesses an infinite sorrow. And sometimes, that sorrow wells up and becomes a song. A lullaby. It rides the fog into the mainland. The adults can't hear it, or they hear it only as the whistling wind. But the children hear it clearly. And they are enchanted by it. They follow the song, into the woods, down to the sea, and are never seen again." "What a chilling story," Mrs. Gable said. "It is," Father Michael agreed. "But what's interesting is that I've found some old documents in the church archives. Records from my predecessors. It seems that, approximately every 30 years, there is a case of an unexplained child disappearance in Viridian Bluffs. Always in the autumn, always during days of heavy fog." There was a pause on the tape. "Are you saying that legend might be true?" Mrs. Gable asked, a note of unease in her voice. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Mrs. Gable," Father Michael said, his voice suddenly weary. "But I know this. This town is keeping a secret. A dark one. And I fear that one day, that secret will swallow us all." The tape ended. I sat in the darkness of the basement, stunned. So Father Michael knew. He was investigating, and perhaps that was why he died. He got too close to the truth. As I was about to get up, I noticed something else in the tape box. A small, black-covered notebook. I opened it. It was Mrs. Gable's notes for the oral history project. I flipped through the pages, reading her notes on other interviews. And then I stopped on one page. It was titled, "The Founding Families." Below it was a list of names: Miller, Patterson, Brodie, Gable, and at the very end, the name, Penhaligon. My family was one of the founders of Viridian Bluffs. We were part of the pact. The Weeping Astrolabe, it wasn't just an heirloom. It was an instrument, a tool of the ritual. Perhaps it was used for divination, to choose the next victim. Perhaps it was a conduit, to amplify the Weeper's song. The truth hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just a random witness to the tragedy of 1983. My family were its architects. Our sudden departure wasn't to protect me. It was to flee from our responsibility. From our own blood debt. I quickly shoved the notebook and the tape into my jacket and bolted from the basement. I had to talk to Sheriff Brodie. He was part of this, too. His family was on the list. He had to know something. I found Brodie at the Salty Dog Tavern. He was sitting alone at the bar, staring into a half-empty glass of beer. The tavern was nearly deserted, save for a few old fishermen in a corner, talking in low murmurs. I slid onto the stool next to him. "We need to talk, Sheriff," I said. Brodie didn't look at me. "Nothing to talk about, Arthur. We're still looking for the girl." "Stop lying to me," I said, my voice hard. "I know about the pact. About the Weeper. About the sacrificed children." Brodie's hand, holding the glass, froze. He slowly turned to look at me. The weary expression was gone from his face. It was hard, and cold. "What the hell would you know? You left. You ran. You have no right to judge us." "My family were founders," I said. "The Penhaligons. I have a right to know." Brodie let out a short, bitter laugh. "The Penhaligons. Keepers of the astrolabe. The cowards who ran when it was their own son's turn to pay the price." The words were a knife twisting in my gut. "What do you mean?" "The 30-year cycle," Brodie said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. 1983. It was your turn, Arthur. The astrolabe had chosen you. Your father saw the sign. But he couldn't go through with it. He broke the oath. He took you away in the night, leaving us to face the consequences. I was speechless. Consequences. The Weeper cannot be denied, Brodie continued, his eyes looking at something far away. When you were gone, it grew angry. The fog wouldn't lift. The seas raged. We had to find a replacement. Quickly. Billy Henderson, the boy wasn't chosen. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. We had to offer him. To appease the wrath. His death is on your father's hands. And yours. There it was. The first twist. The blow I never saw coming. I hadn't just abandoned my friend. I was the reason my friend was dead. My entire life, my entire burden of guilt, was built on a lie. My torment was nothing compared to this truth. And now, 30 years later, Brodie said, his voice cracking, it's come back to collect the debt. It wants a Penhaligon. But you came back. It doesn't need to choose a child anymore. It can have its original offering." He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw no hostility. I saw fear. "It's hunting you, Arthur. Lily Patterson was just the bait. To call you home." The tavern door suddenly burst open. A man ran in, gasping for breath. "Sheriff, the church, St. Giles Church. What is it?" Brody yelled, jumping to his feet. "It's on fire, but the flames, they're black." Brody and I looked at each other for a single, horrified moment. Then we both ran from the tavern. From here, we could see the hill. St. Giles was engulfed in flames. But the man was right. The flames were not red or orange. They were an inky, void-like black, rolling into the grey sky, absorbing the light around them. They produced no heat. Instead, a deathly chill radiated from them, making my teeth chatter. And from within the black fire, a sound arose. Not the crackle of burning wood. It was singing. Hundreds of voices, old and young, singing in unison. Singing that lullaby. But the melody was twisted, inverted, turned into a demonic canticle. Townsfolk were spilling into the street, staring up at the hill with faces of pure terror. They knew what this meant. The pact was broken. To break the bargain is to face its wrath, Alara had said. And as we stood there, watching helplessly as the black fire consumed the church, a fog began to roll in from the sea. Faster than I had ever seen. It was not a natural fog. It moved with a purpose. It poured through the streets, swallowing houses, swallowing cars. And in the fog, I could see shapes. Vague, tall, thin shadows, moving. Sheriff Brody pulled his service pistol, but his hand was shaking. "My God," he whispered. "It's here." I knew this was only the beginning. The black fire and the inverted lullaby were not the end. They were a declaration, an invitation. The gate was opening, and I, Arthur Penhaligon, the chosen one who fled, was standing at the very center of the storm. I had no choice now but to go forward, deeper into the darkness, to find out how to close the gate my family had helped open. To face the Weeper, and perhaps, to finally pay the debt I had owed for 30 years.